Welcome to Perspectives in Business. I am Juan Carlos Giraldo from Boston, United States. Africa is at the forefront of a sustainable and connected era, from innovations in renewable energy to digital transformation. However, neocolonial dynamics and other issues threaten progress. In this episode, our guest is Soha Benchekroun, a researcher and global advisor on climate and development policy based in Rabat, Morocco. We discuss the continent's transformative potential, the risk of neocolonialism, and the complexities of this dual revolution. Hi, Soha, how are you? It's a pleasure to have you today as a guest on my podcast.
Hi, Juan Carlos. Many thanks for having me. Thank you.
No, thank you. So, Soha, today we will explore Africa's role in green and digital futures, unpacking the opportunities and challenges, and what it all means for the continent. And also we will discuss or highlight some part of two articles that you wrote, very interesting about digital transformation or sustainability for whom. Okay, so let's start with the first question.
Yes.
That caught my attention. There is a term which is going to be the central term for this conversation, and this term is green neocolonialism. I want to split this question in two parts. Can you define it for our listeners, what exactly means green neocolonialism? And also, I know that in your research, you have talked about its connection to African industrialization. So can you explain that link?
Sure. Well, green neocolonialism may seem like a big word, but it simply means certain understandings or interpretations of global environmental and climate topics that are used to perpetuate situations of exploitation, of plundering, and economic dependency in African and Global South countries. These situations are comparable to certain realities of colonial times, maybe different in form, but very comparable in substance.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take the industrialization of Africa, we all know that Africa is an extremely rich continent.
Yes.
With its mineral resources and young workforce. We also know that shifting away from widespread poverty, from economic dependency, will not happen if we don't transform these minerals and capture value locally. This is common sense. It's also backed by empirical evidence.
Mm-hmm.
You have success stories in the continent and beyond that show that this is the way to go. Of course, also several studies that demonstrate these correlations between industrialization, economic growth, and social development outcomes. So Africa's industrialization is long overdue. It's an old aspiration of the continent.
Yes.
But it's also obviously threatening the economic interests of powers, in particular Western powers,
I see.
that have been historically benefiting from this situation where Africa endlessly exports and processes minerals,
mm-hmm.
and imports finished products as well. So I think over history, a lot of excuses, if you want, or pretexts have been used to convince us that our African industrial takeoff is not happening anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
You will hear a lot of narratives telling us that African industrialization is difficult or impossible, that we do not have the proper infrastructure, the energy systems, the political environment,
mm-hmm.
that the investment risks are too high. And these narratives are often presented in sophisticated ways that we end up believing that we cannot do it. This is how many of our countries have remained under-industrialized. I mean, as you know, Africa has a ridiculously low share in world manufacturing value added, and this has, of course, contributed to the impoverishment of our populations. Of course, challenges do exist on the road to industrialization in Africa, but they can be overcome if the right political will and conditions are created for that to be overcome. And some countries are showing 60 years after their independence are showing that this is possible, in fact. So Very quickly, to come back to your question, how is climate and environmental discourse used in a way that potentially hinders or further hinders the process of our industrialization? I will give two quick examples. One is how standards for environmental safeguards and ESG ratings that you know well, how these can be used in a way that delays or prevents the implementation of industrial and local transformation projects that are, of course, much needed in our African contexts and should be considered as top priority projects. Also, another example is this narrative around decarbonization. A country like Guinea, like Chad, or any other developing country has social and economic development priorities, and this is what matters. Yes, so the right development and industrialization must be given priority over all other considerations. And this decarbonization discourse in developing countries is very often irrelevant or out of step with national and local priorities. And I really believe that our policies in Africa should reflect our priorities, not donors' priorities. So, each African country should be able to leverage whatever resources or mix of resources they have to secure energy access and industrialization as a priority.
Yes, totally agree with you, Soha. I think the ESG is good thing, but every country have priorities, and as you mentioned, Africa probably provides the raw material for the world's green future, but doesn't get to build its industrial base. It's a tricky, and sometimes it's kind of unfair. I don't know, and it's not fair if you agree with me.
Absolutely, I think that as you say, we should be careful about false climate conversations, which completely disregard the historical responsibility of polluting countries. These countries are still heavily dependent on fossil fuels, and as you said, these countries have been able to industrialize by exploiting Africa's resources, by polluting as well. Don't forget that Africa has been fundamental as a supplier of raw materials to the wealth of these developed nations and to maintaining the quality of life in the West.
Sometimes it's not fair. It's not fair, because if you extract some kind of materials for the Western or for another kind of region, it's also good that some part of this investment or this money is, for the place that is extracted the material. The community has to progress and has to, thrive in economically, financially, quality life, etc.
So what you say is some sort of socio-environmental justice linked to these questions, and the other way. If we do not focus on our priorities and if we do not make these resources benefit to the populations, it becomes some sort of green neocolonialism. So yes, to sum up about this decarbonization topic, I believe we as Africans have no lessons to learn from anyone when it comes to green transitions.
Soha, the last year, I read a book. The name is Cobalt Red. The author is Siddhar Kara. And he explained about what happened with the cobalt, in Congo. And this made me think about the next question that you have writing about it in your article titled Green and Digital Transitions, an Opportunity for Africa, the Case of Congo. So you mentioned that the cobalt mining in the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, is tied to child labor, which is true, and violations, human rights, women rights, people, working in human conditions for $1, probably, I don't know, less, but a day. So, and this, also the pollution around the communities, the water, etc., is insane. So, what are your thoughts? Can you elaborate a little bit what's happening there? I think it's Takanga. I don't remember the name in Congo. And it's terrible. Can you explain a little bit?
Yes, indeed. There is a high human and environmental cost related to the mining of what we call critical minerals in Africa in general. And cobalt in DRC is a very well documented example. The DRC, as you know, is home to the world's largest reserves of cobalt, which is considered key in modern technology and what we call today net zero ambitions. We could say that Congo is really a textbook case for exploring different forms of colonialism and the various related mechanisms. It's very interesting to see also that there is today a renewed interest in this history with the emergence, of an African generation who is curious about the decolonial reading of its past. So in DRC, the legacy of the Belgian colonization and plundering of natural resources by foreign powers has remained long after independence, like in many other African countries. So basically, after the icon of colonial liberation, Patrice Lumumba, was assassinated in the 60s, the country's debt exploded, but also, dependence on Belgium and the US in particular, then on Bretton Woods institutions in the 70s with their structural adjustment loans, which actually haven't helped much from a social development perspective. Then there was a sort of liberalization of the Congolese mining sector that was driven by these same institutions in the early 2000s, and this has not served social policies either. And it was only in 2018 that the country revised its mining code, trying to ensure a less unfair distribution of mining revenues in favor of the Congolese state. So this was just to say that history is important to understand where we are heading and to also understand some current dynamics in DRC and beyond. And this only emphasizes actually the vital importance of a sovereign management of resources, for these resources to benefit the people and not just local and foreign elites. And of course, this comes through informed industrial policies, diversification of partners to implement these policies with respect, of course, for the sovereignty of states. Now, back to your question, we can say that
Exactly.
we can say indeed that the situation of exploitation that is occurring in DRC, it wears somehow the green color of the energy transition, but also that of the digital transition. Our world is dominated by big tech. So this means producing ever more smartphones, tablets, laptops, etc. Our world also believes in technological solutionism to address the environmental crisis, and this translates into the production of ever more electrical vehicles, etc. And all this needs cobalt and copper from Congolese subsoils. So it's unfortunate, as you mentioned, to see that the mining of these minerals has come with practices that are detrimental to the environment, but also to the Congolese people. And 60 million of the Congolese people is still living on less than $2 a day or $2.15 a day in 2022.
That's insane. This is not fair. It shouldn't be that way. First of all, the children should be playing. They shouldn't be working. This is something as my thought, but please keep going.
This is, if you want, one of the many expressions of green neocolonialism. And these, children and their families live also a reality of forced evictions. And it's also happening, forced evictions in the global south are also happening now in other contexts, if you want. And these are also enabled by the green narrative. If you take, this is another example, if you take people evicted for carbon credits and offsetting, instead of cutting out emissions at source, global north countries continue to pollute while making developing countries change their economic systems to offset the emissions from the north. This can, as you see, this can also be a form of green neocolonialism, if you want.
Oh wow, like a double standards, So you promote something and then you do the something against that.
Exactly, they are asking us to decarbonize our economies, and at the same time, while the historical polluters are these global north industrialized nations, right. And instead of cutting out emissions at source, we are now faced with certain realities related to carbon credits, and this can be alarming, especially in the absence of proper regulatory frameworks, and social safeguards in many of our African countries. So there is really a question here of how we can protect ourselves and deal with these market-based and neoliberal mechanisms without strong national frameworks. So that's an issue. So I'll stop here, but it was just one or two examples to show how this whole climate and environmental discourse can be politicized and twisted to fit the interests of some in the north at the expense of the masses in the global south.
And this particular situation occurs because there are in the world a lot of consumerism. So we have the Black Friday, we have the another days that people can buy for the half of the half, any kind of tech product, etc. So the consumerism impacts Africa's green and digital transformation. So my question is, what are the consequences? How does it affect Africa green and digital transformation, this global demand? Because it's global, it's every day and every day and every day. That not only impacts the over exploitation, all the things that we discuss about child labor, etc., etc. Also, the carbon footprint is enormous, But please, what are your thoughts about it?
Consumerism is key, I think, in this conversation, and often we overlook this when we talk about the green and digital transitions and futures. What's happening in African minds is demand-driven. This we should not forget. It is because we need ever more smartphones and laptops and electric vehicles at global level that we continue mining cobalt, copper, bauxite, and other minerals in Africa. So the issue is that we do not question enough consumption patterns in the global north. In this article, as you said, I tried to mention the consumerist madness of Black Friday, but also Cyber Monday, what they call it.
Yeah. Cyber Monday, thank you. I forget.
Yeah, I mean, it generates billions in US online sales. It's just phenomenal, and it's growing every year. And in Europe, this trend towards technological hyper consumption is no less worrying. In addition, these consumption patterns are responsible for what is happening downstream as well. I mean, the large volumes of electronic toxic waste that is dumped by Europe in Africa, of course, where some recycling will take place, but it's often informal. It happens informally and in deplorable conditions. So consumerism is to be blamed for that as well. So I believe this is an important starting point, actually, questioning the demand. Resources are not infinite. Humanity is living on credit well beyond the planet's resources. And this is something that the global north will have to understand at some point and seriously take into account with their economic and growth models. So when you hear forecasts like by 2030 the cobalt market is set to double in size, this should not be taken as a given. It should be questioned. We need to ask how we can make the consumption patterns in the global north change in some way. How can the curve be reversed? And this is why the actual usefulness of so many smart gadgets needs to be questioned.
Yeah, but Soha, but it's not only the personal consumerism, like for example, you and me or people need some stuff, right? It's also how the consumerists impact how pollute the world. For example, we call the e-waste. For example, in Ghana, there are enormous and tons of piles in African dams in Ghana polluting the environment. So this stuff has to be, regulated or see what we have to do with this situation, right?
Exactly. I mean, what's happening in Ghana is also happening in other African countries. this should be also questioned from the perspective of the demand. And you live in the US, so you have certainly heard about the CES, the so-called world's most powerful tech event.
Yes.
I believe it happened a few months ago in Las Vegas. So here you have so many examples of gadgets that try to make their way into our daily life and future.
Yes.
And the real question is that people need to ask in the global north: is this really useful? Are these just false needs dictated by technology companies and their powerful marketing propaganda? Because if we do not question this, if this is not questioned in the global north, we will continue having realities like the one you mentioned in Ghana and other countries. Do I really need a vehicle or a second vehicle?
I think everything in the end has to do with certain kind of regulations, local regulations, government regulations, municipality regulation, also global regulation, policies from the policymakers. But speaking about that, Soha, let's talk about global climate policies that you mentioned also in your article, and how is that related to African realities? So what is the best way to minimize this imbalance, I would say also unfair game, in your opinion?
I mean, as you say, it's a reality that global policies, whether climate related or beyond, if you take also the whole global finance architecture, are not meant to serve our African interests. So I think a long overdue response to this is to take our destiny in our own hands. These past decades have shown how aid is not fit for purpose and how it is built on asymmetries that are rooted in colonial structures. We have seen also a few months ago how unreliable this aid system can be, with US aid cuts. This is yet another wake-up call for Africa. So I would like to give a few examples of African countries that show now a clear willingness to break away from all the dysfunctional models and that start to make industrialization happen with an increasing control over, agreements and contracts. So you take Guinea-Conakry. It's a country where I lived 2 years ago, and every day when I was there, I was asking myself how people can be poor in a country that is so rich. And I was happy to come back just recently in another context and visit what will be the first alumine refinery in Guinea since the country's independence. There is currently a push for effective implementation of agreements on local processing in this country. This is somehow, it marks the end of an era in which Guinea contented itself with exporting raw materials. Guinea is the country with the world's largest bauxite reserves. So I think we should be very optimistic that this effort will translate with the right ecosystem into revenue generation, into employment, into social development spin-offs, etc. You have also Burkina Faso, quickly. It's another African country that now fully realizes that widespread poverty in our resource-rich countries is an aberration, and that the current, African generation is not willing to accept this situation anymore. So Burkina Faso has launched recently many initiatives to establish tomato, cotton processing plants, to get out of the debt trap, to enhance local processing capabilities for gold, to invest in roads and infrastructure, to promote local crafts, and you feel that there is a sincere effort to put forward sovereignty in every aspect of running the country. So when we see this wind of change, of course the road is still long, but we can only support and wish every success to this drive in the continent.
Yeah, no, certainly. Also, Kenya, I guess, have a geothermal and wind energy, like powering like over 90%, of its grid, and proper support electricity. Something that I read about the green infrastructure in Kenya, for example, right?
Yeah, there are other African countries investing in industrialization, and this is something that can only be, that should be strongly encouraged. Kenya, also you have Ethiopia. You mentioned the example of renewable energies. Ethiopia also is leading in this sector. Kenya, of course, as well.
It's fascinating. It's enormous and great opportunities as well. I understand we have challenges in Africa, but also these challenges turn in great opportunities as well. Speaking about opportunities, Soha, the sustainable agendas are a great opportunities, right? For Africa, for green and digital future. So let's talk about what can the sustainability agendas truly serve African populations, in your opinion?
I think we need to simply remember, as I tried to put it in this article and also in a recent contribution to a collective book, we hear again and again that Africa is the future of mankind and of low carbon transition to counter global warming, etc. But we seem to forget that Africa is above all the future of Africans. It's a land where all Africans should be able to thrive and live with dignity. So I think our sustainability agendas and the way we project ourselves and our role as Africans in these global digital and green transitions should simply be reflective of this aim. As far as climate is concerned, I think our focus must be climate adaptation, how to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Africa being one of the least emitters and the worst hit by the impacts of climate change.
Yes.
And beyond climate, I believe that we need to pursue our socio-economic, industrial, and technological development based on our own models of consumption and innovation. And these are a source of opportunities,
yes,
as you mentioned, but also an inspiration for the world in the field of digital and ecological transitions. Take mobile money. You mentioned the example of Kenya. Kenya is very advanced when it comes to mobile money. So this is an opportunity in the field of digital transition where Kenya is leading. Also low technology. Now more and more global north countries are looking into low technology as opposed to high tech. That's why I believe we should also be careful about all forms of cultural imperialism. The Western consumerist lifestyle should not be in any way a societal ideal for us.
Every country that has different agendas, different kinds of approaches, different kinds of adoption, induction, or perceive, or adaptation. Some countries are slower, some countries are faster. Something that I notice is like the agenda has to be for all the countries in the world the same. Every country have, back to the first part of the conversation, has their own priorities. So let's start with that,
And all this, just transitions topic must be priority oriented for developing countries.
Exactly.
And as you said, the approaches must be different. And northern countries today have to learn to be frugal, as Africans and also global south countries can help in this learning process, since frugality is in our value system.
Yes, exactly. The education is a part, is important, is crucial in this kind of situation. So we are almost, wrapping up this conversation. What are your final thoughts about this topic, just as summarizing, wrapping up, and also where people can contact you?
I believe that we do need to consider the sustainability issues, green and digital transition issues through a Pan-African and global South lens. I'm also happy to see that beyond ecology, today there are interesting dynamics in the sense that we hear more and more calls for decolonial thinking in all fields of life. These are carried by young politicians, artists, activists, as well as engineers, doctors, intellectuals, researchers. So it's built on a more Afrocentric vision of development, of education, science, humanitarianism, arts, drawing on the heritage of Pan-Africanist thinkers. I think it's important, and of course the transformations happening and the transformations needed are complex and will not take place overnight. But this is a momentum, and this is, I believe, how we can take ownership of our development.
Yeah, let me add something. Africa have immense potential, as a global support, many things, because continent, they have enormous resources that are providing for all of us, where people can contact you, Soha?
Thanks for asking. Well, on my email address, soha.familyname@gmail.com. So it's soha.benchekroun@gmail.com, or on LinkedIn. Soha Benchekroun.
I will add the links on LinkedIn and the episode and description to people can contact you without any problem, because I read these couple articles and all your the work that you are doing around Africa, and it's very impressive. Also, we meet in Harvard Business School to learn more about sustainability. Soha, I would like to say thank you for your time.
Well, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me, and all the best with this wonderful podcast series.
Thank you, Soha. I am Juan Carlos Giraldo from Boston, United States. Thank you so much, everyone.